Welcome, everyone. My name is Sarah Ray from the Bloomfield Public Library. Thank you for joining us today for another opera talk as we explore Aida with Jeffrey Engel. I'm going to have you on mute now, Jeffrey, and take it away.
So, good afternoon and welcome to Aida. Perfect. That's probably one of the most famous, if not the most famous, fanfare ever written in music. Opera, symphony, and if not the most famous, certainly the most recognizable. And that's at the beginning of Scene 2 of Act 2, which we won't listen to today, but serves as a good introduction. So we're dealing with Giuseppi Verdi, born in 1813, dies in 1901, and much has been written about him. He is one of our great composers. Some writers say he was the greatest writer of opera. He's been referred to as the Italian Colossus, as an Olympian. One writer says that for every day of the year, there is at least one performance of a Verdi opera somewhere in the world. That's probably not far from the truth. He composed 28 operas, and you have to break that down to it's 26 plus 2, meaning that 2 of the 26, you had I Lombardi in 1843. Verdi decided to do a revision of it, new music, improvements on the text, and he comes out with another version called Jerusalem in 1847, but they're considered two different operas. The same is true of the 1850 Stifalio, which was a failure, and then was revised again in music and text, and reproduced in 1857 as Arnaldo. So we can say 28 operas, and of the 28, you can easily say that 15 are in the current repertory, are staples in the repertory. You're going to hear them a lot. And that's a pretty good percentage. If you look at Puccini, well, he wrote 12 operas, and you could say half, 6, are in the repertory very frequently. Wagner wrote 14 operas, you could say 11. But of the 11, you've got 3 like Lohengrin, Tannhäuser, Flying Dutchman. You don't hear them really that often. But when you write 28 operas and more than half are in the repertory, that's quite extraordinary. Now, with Verdi, very often you have these complicated origins to his works, the creation process. And this is certainly true with Aida. Aida, which will be his third to last, and following it, well, let's say as he's getting older, he's taking more time to write operas, and after Aida, in fact, he considered himself retired, but he will still write Otello, but that comes much later, in 1887, when he's 74, and then, once again, you would think he would stick to his idea of retirement and then produces Falstaff at the age of 80 in 1893, which, when you think of it, is really astounding. I cannot think of another composer who wrote masterpieces, and certainly operatic masterpieces, at the age of 74 and at the age of 80. This is quite something. And these are great works. They're not just works that fall far below his level of quality that he had maintained during so much of his life. So another aspect of Verdi where he is really in a unique spot in the ranks. So anyway, Aida comes in, is going to be premiered in 1871, but it's going to take a while to get to it. Now we have to go back to 1867, and we're in Paris, and we have the premiere of, right behind me, though it wasn't actually in that hall, but that is the Paris Opera. That's the Palais Garnier, which is going to be built after the premiere of Don Carlos, his fourth to last opera. And it's going to have 43 performances, will be considered a success. His original librettist was one Giuseppi Verdi, but sadly he dies in the middle of the work. And you're going to have the libretto finished by one Camille Dulocle. And Dulocle that wasn't his main profession. He was more of an opera administrator. So that from 1862 to 1870, he was the assistant to his uncle, Émile Perrin, who was the director of l'Opéra. And then Dulocle becomes the director of l'Opéra Comique in 1870. He's either sole director or joint director until 1876, which means that the premiere of Carmen would come under his time in office. But he will complete the libretto of Don Carlos and establish a very good rapport with Verdi, to the point that after we have the premiere of Don Carlos, Verdi is in search of a new subject. He's not thinking retirement yet. And it's Dulocle who's going to feed him several ideas. There's the play Tartuffe by Molière, which is rejected. Then there were two plays by two different Spanish authors. That's also rejected. And there was the subject of Nerone, or Nero. That did tempt Verdi, but it had been undertaken by Arrigo Boito, his future librettist for Otello and Falstaff. And it's around 1862 that Boito is already thinking about Nerone, and he's going to work on it for nearly 60 years, and at his death in 1918 leaves it incomplete. So, out of fairness, Verdi decides, well, he won't go the route of that subject. And then there are two plays by Victorien Sardou. For those of you who tuned in to Tosca, that was the author of Tosca. And second half of the 19th century, he was one of the most popular and most successful playwrights in Paris. Actually, to digress a little bit, I was recently in touch with the daughter of a good friend of mine in France. He was a violinist. We played in the same orchestra. And his daughter came to New York and wanted me to come down and see her, and I'm too old to do that type of thing. So we communicated by email, telephone calls, and Zooms. And I asked her, because I was very curious, had she ever heard of Sardou? Is he still performed today? And she said, in fact, she went to the play Tosca about 5-6 years ago, but otherwise he's completely forgotten. If anyone is remembered, it's Michel Sardou, and I remember him way back in the 1970s and 80s when I was living in Paris. He was a pop singer. He must be my age now. Anyway, Sardou, who pretty much has fallen by the wayside, but there were two plays by him suggested by Dulocle, and Verdi turns them down. So we come to a pretty much forgotten figure by the name of Auguste Mariette. He's born in 1821, dies in 1881. Apparently the father of 11 children. And sadly, by 1864, 5 had already passed away. He's appointed Egyptologist for the Louvre in 1846 and then is sent down to Egypt. And he is responsible for uncovering the remains of several ancient cities. One was Karnak, and I'm not referring to the skeleton of Johnny Carson, Memphis and Thebes, and also he cleared away the base of the Sphinx. He was greatly honored in Egypt. He was given the title of Bey, B-E-Y, or as governor. And he would open a Cairo Museum of Art, Egyptian art, also established in the Institute of Egypt. And after he makes all these discoveries, he decides to write a scenario that could be used as a basis of an opera based on his findings. And he puts together the scenario called Aida, with a T. which eventually will be changed to a D because it's very hard to sing the T. And he doesn't have any composer in mind, but he will have the scenario sent to Verdi, and if Verdi rejects it, he was thinking of Wagner and some other composers. And Verdi is going to get the scenario in April of 1870 and become intrigued with it and decide that he will do an opera based on Egyptian tradition, custom, maybe history. Now, the connection of Verdi to Egypt goes back a little bit to 1862. This is the period when we're building the Suez Canal. That dates from 1859 till 1869. You might recall from high school social studies Ferdinand de Lesseps, who was actually not the engineer or the architect, but was a diplomat who convinced the Khedive of Egypt, the ruler, to allow for a canal to be built in the area of Suez. And the opening of the canal will take place on November 17th of 1869. A grand affair, a whole flotilla of ships led by a French ship, the yacht called the Eagle or l'Aigle, with the Empress Eugénie on board on top waving to everybody. And for the opening of the canal, the Khedive had wanted to have Verdi write a hymn for the occasion, but apparently the conditions weren't right for Verdi and he turned it down. Now, the Khedive at this point was one Ismail Pasha, becomes Khedive in 1863, and he was quite Western oriented. He was educated in Paris. He goes back to Paris in 1867 to attend performances of La Grande Duchesse de Gerolstein, a very popular opera of that summer by Offenbach, and it starred Hortense Schneider, who was half courtesan, half actress, that's too many halves, third courtesan, third actress, third singer. And her lodge was kind of a meeting place for all the great political people of the day. And it wasn't just to shake hands, as they say, catch my drift. And we believe that Khedive was one of those backstage with her. And he was trying to improve musical education, Western music in Egypt, though that dates back to 1824. Previous Khedive would introduce music education in schools, and it was provided by French and German foreigners. I should add that in 1841 we have the first performance of an opera in Egypt, which when you think of it is really late. Think in terms of Rossini, who stopped composing operas by 1829, or Donizetti, who's at the end of composing operas. There'll be a couple more until 1845. Verdi is just beginning. His first opera is 1839. But this is the point when Egypt gets to hear an opera, not in Cairo, in Alexandria. Then there'll be some performances by traveling Italian groups or troops. But the idea is to build a theater that will be able to give operatic performances in Cairo. And so Ismail Pasha will hire a team of Italian architects, and they'll put up a theater. It's at about 850. And I guess the idea was to have Verdi offer an opera for the first performance, but that wouldn't work out. And it would be a Verdi opera. It would be Rigoletto that opened the theater. But from what I gather, there were just a couple of performances, and the first full season would take place in the next fall. So the fall of 69 through March of 70, and you had a full season of opera, mainly Italian opera. Now, getting back to Verdi, and I should add, in case you don't know your history very well of this time, in 19th century, sort of Near East Europe, the Khedive, as I said, was the ruler of Egypt, but Egypt was still a part of the Ottoman Empire, so he was subject to the rule of the Sultan. Couldn't really act independently, but he was given great liberties. Ismail Pasha loved to spend money, and he spent it quite lavishly on his trips, on living a very luxurious style, and by the 1870s, everyone had enough of him and he was kicked out. So now, back to Verdi, and he has this scenario by Mariette, and he's going to start to talk terms of contract in June of 1870, and he will provide an opera for Cairo, but it won't be for that first season, it's too late. And he comes up with the terms, and he could name his own terms, and these are very, very favorable to Verdi. He would pay his own librettist so that he would retain all the rights to the libretto. And he would retain all the rights to the music except for performances in Egypt. Those rights would go to the Khedive. He would also have the right to pay and choose his own producer or director and conductor, and he would be paid a colossal sum. I didn't look up the equivalent. It was 150,000 francs in pure gold, which was placed in a Rothschild bank, and once he had completed the opera and given it to the Egyptians, the money was his. So the contract will be signed at the end of August of 1870, and he only has about 6 weeks to put this opera together. It's scheduled to be performed in November, but unfortunately we have a political problem and it can't be performed. So it is finished by mid-November. But he was remaining in contact with Camille Dulocle, and it was Dulocle who took the scenario of Mariette and converted it into a prose libretto. And that would be then given to an Italian librettist, one of the more important ones of the day, Antonio Ghilanzoni. He says he wrote some 85 libretti. Historians said he only wrote half of that. But he's given credit for the libretto. He would take the prose of Dulocle and turn it into Italian verse. And the opera would be given in Italian in Cairo. But the problem is we have the outbreak of the Franco-Prussian War. This is in July of 1870. And the costumes and the decor were being produced in Paris under the eyes of Dulocle and also Mariette, who wanted these to be as much, as the French say, d'époque, of the period, authentic as possible. Well, unfortunately, on September 2nd, we have a great battle of Sedan in eastern France, and the French army is just destroyed, humiliated. It's the worst defeat in French history. And add to the humiliation, Emperor Louis Napoleon is captured by the Germans and imprisoned in a German Schloss and kept there for 3 months. And meanwhile, the Prussian troops move on to Paris, lay siege to the city on September 20th, which means nothing goes in and nothing goes out of the city. If you wanted to send a message, you had to go to the top of the Palais Garnier, which was still being built, but you could send a balloon with the message out. But you couldn't get any sets or costumes out of the city, and this will be the situation until January 28th of 1871, when an armistice is signed, and now Paris has opened up, and we can get to working towards this premiere. Still will take a while, and the premiere takes place on December 24th of 1871 in Cairo, and needless to say, is a huge success. Verdi does not attend. He's too busy getting involved with the Italian premiere, which will take place in February of 1872. He wanted this to be perfect, and he was quite a perfectionist. He believed not in just in singing, but in having singing actors. Got one of the best Verdi interpreters of the day, Teresa Stolz, who was a Bohemian soprano, and also had a very fine conductor. Now, for the Cairo performance, Verdi obviously didn't attend, and he wanted the best available conductor. And for him, this was Mariani. Now, Mariani, who's born in 1821, once again, another one that year, dies in 1873, Angelo Mariani, was the first of the great Italian conductors. I mean, you have in quick succession, you have Mariani, born 1821. In 1840, Franco Faccio, who was the conductor of the Italian premiere of Aida at La Scala, and then, of course, Toscanini in 1867. These are your three greats, three different generations. And in Verdi's mind, there was only one conductor for Aida, and that would be Mariani. Now, Mariani, very important in Italian conducting history, in that before him you really didn't have an important Italian conductor. For the performance of an opera, the conductor of it for a couple of performances would be the composer himself. Then he would leave, and either the concertmaster or some even lesser known figure would take over. Mariani is the first to devote himself to conducting and to concentrate on turning an orchestra into a very well-oiled, disciplined instrumental machine. And in 1852, he becomes the conductor of the Carlo Felice Teatro in Geneva, and he turns that orchestra into the best opera orchestra in Italy, better than Naples, better than Milano, La Scala. And he and Verdi are going to get to know each other because he does conduct Verdi and conducts him very well. There are some differences of opinion in terms of tempi or whether certain instruments should maybe be heard a bit louder than others, and there will be conflicts, to the point that Verdi will refer to him two ways. When he's not pleased, he'll call them testa falsa, or wrong head, and when he's pleased with him, buona testa, good head. And Mariani didn't mind. If he felt maybe he had been a little excessive in his liberties, he'd write back to Verdi and he would sign a testa falsa, being very apologetic. But on the whole, it was a very good working relationship. And in fact, for that opera Arnaldo of 1857, they would collaborate on the opera together. So in his mind, Mariani was the one and the only choice for this great premiere. Unfortunately, Mariani turns Verdi down, only for the reason of health. He had bladder cancer, and he was slowly dying. Verdi didn't know this, and would hold a grudge against him even after his death in 1873, because he continued to conduct in Geneva. He just didn't want to make the long trip down to Cairo. And he would die a terrible death, very painful, without a doctor, alone in a small room in Genoa. And even after his death, Verdi wasn't very generous. He would say, "It's a great loss to art," and that was it. He never forgave him. But now Verdi was stuck. He needed a conductor. And at this point, he didn't care. He said, "Anybody you want." After all, it's only Cairo, which was a backwater musical place. His focus was on La Scala. And so chosen for the performance will be Giovanni Bottesini. Again, born in 1821, dies in 1889. If he's remembered today, it would be as being one of the great, better than that. He was the greatest double bass player after the death of Dragonetti in 1846, throughout the rest of the century until Kusevitsky, the great conductor, but people tend to forget he was a great double bass virtuoso. And Bottesini did conduct, not quite sure if he was that good. He was also a composer. He wrote 13 operas, a lot of music for one double bass, two double basses. Actually, at this point, I'll play you one just to rest you from all this information. This is just a piece in 3 movements for 2 double basses and strings called Passionate Love. you can tell all your friends that you heard a piece by Giovanni Bottesini. I'm sure they haven't heard anything. Maybe they shouldn't. So, the opera is going to be performed in Cairo, obviously a big success. Goes on to La Scala, another big success. Massive production, a chorus of 120, orchestra of 90 players. This is big time. And it has gone on to become one of the most popular operas ever written. It's going to be premiered at the Met in 1886, and until 1987, it'll receive 651 performances, which is more performances than any other opera at the Met. Coming in second, close behind, would be La Bohème at 631 performances, but keep in mind that La Bohème was premiered only in 1900, so it was getting more performances in lesser time. So I think we can go to the opera. As you probably know, those that tune in, I don't like getting into plots. I just don't think people go to operas for plots. Yeah, if it's Elektra, very exciting opera, and you should know the libretto, because the libretto is so important. But Aida, really, unless you're rather sadistic and you just want to see two people entombed at the end, it's the music. The music is glorious. Everything else, I would say, is secondary. But I will give you a brief account, as brief as possible. So we start with Act 1, and we are, for the total of the opera, the action takes place in two cities, Memphis and Thebes. Thebes only, scene 2 of Act 2, when we're at the gates of Thebes and we have the great triumphal scene. Otherwise, everything's in Memphis. So at the beginning, we are in the apartments of the king, and we have a high priest named Ramphis, and he is conversing with Radames, who's the captain of the guard. Now, previous to the opening of the opera, there had been a war with Ethiopia. This is a fictitious war. It never happened, though it happens according to the plot. And during this battle, the king of the Ethiopians, Amenasco, loses his daughter Aida. She's captured by the Egyptians, and she is made a slave to Princess Amneris, who is the daughter of the king. And so he's going to wage a second war in order to regain his daughter. And so Ramphis is telling Radames that he has been appointed commander of Egyptian forces to go into battle. And he leaves, and Radames has maybe the aria, that's one of 2 or 3 arias that are great in this work. It's Celeste Aida, where he sings of his love for Aida. He's in love with Aida, Aida's in love with him, Amneris is in love with Radames, and so you can imagine things are not going to work out very well. So rather than just play you one version, I'm going to play you 2 versions of the great aria. I won't ask afterwards which one you prefer. I hope you will catch on as to which one you should prefer. And we'll start with number 1. I'll tell you who's singing afterwards. And it is the following. Very famous tenor.
Se guerrieri fossi, se il mio sogno si avverasse, un esercito di prodi da me guidato, e la vittoria e il piano dimenticata, tornar di lauricinto, dirti perché ho pugnato, perché ho vinto. tuo bel cielo vorrei ridarti le dolci brezze del patrio suol. Una rega cerca, sola qui in posarti, e ricerchi ancora, e vicino al sol. Un trono vicino al sol, un trono vicino al sol.
That's not an easy aria to sing because Radames comes on stage and he has very little time to warm up, and then he's got to sing these long phrases, top notes. So for anyone, it's rather difficult. Now, when you're listening to these, think in terms of richness and brilliance of sound. That's what interests me most. In terms of musicality, everyone has his opinion. I'm sure that tenor thought he was singing musically. I'm sure this next one thinks he is. But it's more the sound that I'm after. And so here's number 2.
Se quei guerrieri affossi, se il mio sogno si avverasse. Un esercito di frodi da me guidato, e la vittoria e il plauso di me fitata. E a te, mia dolce Aida, tornar di lauri tinto, dirti perché ho pugnato, perché ho
I like the way the second tenor ends with that pianissimo, whereas the first tenor, like most tenors, chose to sing it very loud at the end. Tenor number 1 was Richard Tucker, who thought he was the greatest tenor in the world. I don't believe it. And the second was Franco Corelli. And I hope you will agree there's a huge difference, and the difference favors the second. That sound is extraordinary. My wife for Christmas gave me the greatest gift I could imagine, the biography of Franco Corelli. I didn't even know it existed. I'm trying to convince Sarah to let me do a program just on him to show people what an amazing voice this was. It might not have been the most musical, and he loved to sing his high notes, but also in comparison to Tucker, he always sings in tune. I've never heard him sing off key. Tucker sometimes in his lower register is close to being off pitch, and I've heard Tucker on television on the Bell Telephone Hour literally miss a high C and be completely off. Corelli never disappoints. He's always on. I've got many recordings of live performances. I just bought one of the Verdi Requiem with Zubin Mehta done in Los Angeles. And then at the end of it, they had tracks from the Ed Sullivan Show, where he appeared several times. And then a concert he gave in Providence, Rhode Island. What the hell was he doing in Providence, Rhode Island? He must have been paid a fortune. But a lot of fun to listen to it live. It sounds like a studio recording. It's just an amazing sound. And this made me think of, this is kind of silly, I'm digressing here. There are two very important music dictionaries. One is the Grove, and I've talked about this many times, dates back to 1889. New edition comes out every 25, 30 years. And you'll have an article on, it could be an instrumentalist, singer, composer. And at the beginning, they give the name, the date, the places of birth, and maybe what was in terms of a composer, it would be the contribution to musical composition. Singers, they won't say very much. They won't give an opinion. The opinions are more reserved for composers, and there'll be in-depth studies at the end of the article. Then there's the Baker's Dictionary of Musicians, and it's also undergone many revisions. It dates back with different names. It's called Macmillan, it's called other things, back into the 1930s. I have the 1992 edition. What they do is, for singers, for example, they'll have the name, the date, the birthplaces, and they'll have maybe one or two words to describe the greatness or the averageness of that singer. If the singer is really not that good, like let's say I looked up George Shirley. That was his place in history as, I think, being the first black singer to sing at the Met. They just say American tenor. Otherwise, most of them will have these little summaries. I thought I'd read you a couple. I was kind of fascinated by this. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but this is one of our great Helden tenors, Wolfgang Wingassen. Word is distinguished tenor, distinguished German tenor. U.C. Bierling, some of you will recall him, very fine Swedish tenor. Eminent tenor. Caruso, this is odd, celebrated Italian tenor, that's it. Jose Carreras, one of the three tenors, prominent tenor. Placido Domingo, another of the three, famous tenor. Wow, that's knocking him down a peg. Nicolai Guerra, noted Swedish tenor. Mario Delmonico, powerful Italian tenor. Pavarotti, greatly renowned Italian tenor. Joyce, that must please you very much. Richard Tucker, I'm rather surprised, brilliant American tenor. And Franco Corelli, outstanding Italian tenor. I don't know what the difference is between brilliant and outstanding. I think they should say brilliant for the voice for Corelli, but who am I to say anything? But kind of interesting the way they're looked upon. Corelli was definitely one of the greats and had a unique voice. Anyway, moving on. we next have Amneris on the scene, and then Aida. And she's, I guess, sees that Aida and Radames are making eyes at one another, and this doesn't bode well. Scene 2, we're in the temple of Vulcan in Memphis, and Radames and Ramphis, well, let's say Ramphis is leading the ceremony, is getting the blessing of the gods for Radames, gives him a holy sword, and says, come back here and make sure you protect the motherland, etc., etc. End of Act 1. Act 2, we're in the apartment of Amneris. And Amneris plays a rather nasty trick on Aida because she wants to see if, in fact, there is something going on between the two of them. And says, oh, by the way, Radames was killed in battle. Aida, of course, shrieks and shows her emotion for him. And she gets into a fight with Amneris, but she's just a slave girl. And then we have the triumphal procession. This will be in scene 2, as I said, at the gates of Thebes. And you have Radames leading his troops back. We've got the king, Ramphis, overlooking all this. And we've got a lot of Ethiopian prisoners, and they're led by this one bare-chested, hairy man who turns out to be Amonasro. And the only one who recognizes him is Aida. She runs up to him. Of course, Aida has never said to anyone that she's the daughter of the king. And he says to her, don't betray me. And then he has a long aria where he begs for forgiveness and asks for clemency for himself and his prisoners. Radames joins in with the idea of clemency, and the king offers them clemency. End of Act 2. End of the act, behind the scenes, probably over a glass of wine, Radames is going to ask Aida to meet with him at the banks of the river Nile. Before he gets there, Amonasro appears, and much to her horror, forces her to find out from Radames when the next and where the next attack will take place. She's very reluctant. She's torn between country and father and lover. But in the end, she agrees. Radames arrives in great voice and all excited. And at first she says, go away, get out of here, I don't want to talk to you. But then she gives in to him. And after some lengthy duets, she asks the question, where will your troops be stationed? I always forget the name of this. Something called the Gorges of Napta, I think. And Amonasro overhears this and comes popping out of the bushes and says, my troops will be there. Radames, of course, is aghast. Amneris overhears this, calls for Ramphis and the guards. They arrest Radames. Aida and Amonasro flee and escape. And we have the next scene, and we are in Amneris' apartments, which very conveniently are on top of the justice room. And Radames is on trial. He's asked to defend himself. He refuses to speak, and he's condemned to live entombment. And then Amneris has her one great aria, and is despairing, of course. And in Act 4, we're in the tomb. There is Radames, and to his great surprise, discovers that Aida was able to sneak in. And they have a final duet together, and end of opera, very sad. So I think we'll listen to the duet between Radames, succession of duets, Radames and Aida at the beginning of Act 3. We'll have to skip the major arias. And again, Franco Corelli, and in this recording with the Zubin Mehta, it's Birgit Nielsen, great soprano, best known for her Wagnerian roles, but she was very good singing Tosca or singing Verdi roles. Didn't sing a lot, Masked Ball, Aida. I don't think there are any others. And really, when you compare her voice, which some said is a bit cold for something like Aida, when you compare it to the sopranos you hear today, give me cold. There's just such a huge difference. I don't know what is happening to operatic singers today. I keep listening to these broadcasts on the radio of the Met, and I'm becoming iller and iller. I just go back to my recordings. Maybe there's something wrong with my ears. I don't know. Well, here we go. Aida and Radames. First, Radames.
Amor
don't tell me that we have singers like that today. That is just a stunning sound. I'm sorry, I shouldn't get too opinionated here, but wow, those were the days. Anyway, that's it for Aida. Open for questions or criticisms.